The afternoon sun hammered down on Red Hollow like a blacksmith's anvil, turning the dirt streets into rivers of heat, shimmer, and misery. Silas Crow stood on the warped boards outside the Silver Dust Saloon, one boot propped against a post, watching the town move around him like he owned every inch of it. And in a way, he did. Not because anyone elected him, not because he wore a badge or carried the law in his pocket. Silas Crow ruled Red Hollow through something far simpler and far uglier: fear. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with hands that looked like they'd been carved from oak and left to weather in the sun. A scar ran from his left eyebrow down to his jawline, a memento from a knife fight years back when he'd been younger and stupider. He liked to say it gave him character. What it really gave him was a permanent scowl that made children cross the street and their mothers hurry them along faster. His face told the story of 100 bar fights, 1,000 intimidations. His nose had been broken so many times it sat crooked on his face. His knuckles were thick with old scars, the kind you got from hitting bone instead of bags. Everything about Silas Crow said violence, and violence was the language Red Hollow had learned to speak. "Afternoon, Mr. Crow," a shopkeeper called out, his voice tight with the kind of politeness that came from terror rather than respect. Silas didn't respond. He just watched the man scurry past, arms loaded with supplies, moving like a rabbit that just spotted a wolf. That was how most people moved around Silas, quick, nervous, eyes down. It should have felt good. For years, it had felt good. But lately, something had started to rot inside that satisfaction. The door to the saloon swung open behind him, and Frank Dutton stepped out, squinting against the brightness. Frank was one of Silas's crew. Not that Silas would ever call them friends. You didn't have friends when you ruled through fear. You had people who were more afraid of crossing you than they were of standing beside you. "Boss?" Frank said, his voice carrying that edge of nervousness everyone seemed to have around Silas. "That rancher from the Northern Territory. He's inside. Says he's got the money he owes you." Silas didn't move. He let Frank stand there, sweating in his vest and dusty pants, waiting for a response. It was a small power play, the kind Silas had perfected over the years. Make them wait. Make them wonder. Make them afraid. "He's 3 weeks late," Silas finally said, his voice low and gravelly like stones grinding together. "Yes, sir. He knows. He's real sorry about that. Had some trouble with his herd, he says. Don't care about his excuses." "No, sir, of course not." Silas pushed off the post and turned toward the saloon doors. Frank stepped aside quickly, giving him space, always giving him space. That was how it worked in Red Hollow. Silas moved, and the world rearranged itself around him. Inside, the saloon was dim and smelled like stale beer, tobacco, and broken dreams. A few men sat at tables, playing cards with the kind of desperate concentration that suggested they were gambling with money they couldn't afford to lose. The bartender, a thin man named Pete, with a mustache that looked like a dead caterpillar, was wiping down the bar with a rag that had probably been dirty since last Christmas. Everyone looked up when Silas entered. Everyone always looked up. Then everyone went back to pretending they hadn't noticed him, their eyes fixed too intently on their cards or their drinks. The rancher sat alone at a corner table, his hat in his hands, turning it over and over like a prayer wheel. Silas crossed the room slowly. He liked making them wait, liked watching them squirm. The rancher was maybe 50, weathered and sun-beaten, with the kind of calloused hands that came from 30 years of hard work. Good man, probably. Honest man. The kind who paid his debts and raised his kids right. Didn't matter. Debt was debt. "Mr. Crow," the rancher said, standing up too quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I got your money, all of it. I'm real sorry about the delay." "Sit down." The rancher sat. Silas remained standing, towering over him. Another power play. Always with the power plays. "You know what happens when people don't pay me on time?" Silas asked, his voice quiet. The whole saloon could hear him anyway. They always could. "Yes, sir, I do. And I'm—" "Do you?" The rancher swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Tell me." Things get broken. Property gets damaged, sometimes worse." "Sometimes worse," Silas repeated, nodding slowly. "That's right. Sometimes worse. So why are you 3 weeks late?" "The herd got sick. We lost 40 head. I had to borrow from my brother-in-law just to make what I owe you. I swear on my life, Mr. Crow, I wasn't trying to avoid you. I just didn't have it until now. Silas stared at him for a long moment. The rancher stared back, then looked down at his hat. Silas could see the man's hand shaking. Good. Fear was the foundation of everything here. Put the money on the table. The rancher did, pulling a small leather pouch from his coat and setting it down carefully, like it might explode. Silas picked it up, hefted it, felt the weight of the coins inside. He didn't count it. Didn't need to. The rancher wouldn't dare short him. Next time you're late, Silas said, I burn your barn. The time after that, I burn your house. You understand me? Yes, sir. Won't happen again. I swear. Get out. The rancher grabbed his hat and practically ran for the door. The moment he was gone, the tension in the room eased slightly. Men went back to their cards with less rigid shoulders. Pete went back to wiping the bar with renewed vigor. Frank appeared at Silas's elbow. Want me to check the count? Frank asked. No. Silas pocketed the pouch and moved toward the bar. Whiskey. Pete had the glass poured before Silas reached him. The liquor burned going down, but it was a familiar burn, one Silas had made friends with years ago. He stared at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar, the scar, the crooked nose, the eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. This was power. This was control. This was everything he'd built. So why did it feel like standing on top of a mountain made of sand? The door opened again, and Silas glanced over, expecting another frightened face, another person with their eyes down and their spine bent. Instead, he saw her, Mara Quinn. She moved through the saloon like she owned it, which was closer to the truth than anyone liked to admit. Mara ran the general store, the only one in town worth shopping at, and she'd built her business through something Silas never understood: genuine respect. People liked her. They wanted to do business with her. They didn't cross the street when she approached. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple dress, work clothes really, but she carried herself with more dignity than most rich women Silas had seen in the cities. And she had never, not once in all the years Silas had known her, shown him the slightest bit of fear. It drove him crazy. Mara, he said, nodding to her as she approached the bar. Silas, she replied, her voice neutral. Pete poured her a glass of water without being asked. She took it and drank slowly, not hurrying, not acknowledging the weight of Silas's stare. You need something? Silas asked. Not from you. The words were quiet, but they hit like a slap. Frank shifted uncomfortably nearby. Pete suddenly found a spot on the bar that needed intense cleaning. Silas felt heat crawl up his neck, that familiar anger rising. Everyone needs something from me eventually, he said. Mara set down her glass and looked at him directly. Her eyes were steady, calm, completely unafraid. No, Silas. Everyone is afraid of you. That's not the same thing as needing you. There's a difference. Not much of one. There's all the difference in the world. She turned and walked out, leaving her water glass half full on the bar. Silas stared after her, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. Behind him, he could feel the entire saloon pretending not to have heard the exchange. He wanted to break something, wanted to smash his glass against the mirror, wanted to grab someone and make them feel the rage that was boiling in his chest. But that would prove her point, wouldn't it? He drained his whiskey instead and slammed the glass down harder than necessary. Another. Pete poured. Silas drank. The afternoon dragged on. That evening, Silas sat in his room at the boarding house, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. It was a Colt .45, well-maintained, the barrel gleaming. He'd owned it for years, but had never been much good with it. Never needed to be. When you built your reputation on your fists and your willingness to hurt people, accuracy didn't matter much. But lately, he'd started practicing. It had begun as a way to add another weapon to his arsenal of fear. He'd ride out to the canyon west of town and shoot at bottles, cans, anything that would shatter or ring. At first he was terrible, missing more than he hit, his shots wild and uncontrolled. But he kept at it, day after day, week after week. Not because he loved shooting, but because he loved the idea of what being good at it would mean. A gunslinger, a shootist, the fastest draw in the territory. That was power that didn't require breaking bones or burning barns. That was power that came from skill, from respect. At least that's what he told himself. He'd gotten better. Much better. His draw was quick now, smooth. He could hit a can at 20 paces more often than not. And he'd started letting rumors spread, carefully, subtly, about his prowess with a pistol, about men he'd supposedly faced down, about draws he'd won in other towns. Most of it was lies. All of it was lies, really. But lies became truth if enough people believed them. There was a knock at his door. Silas set down the revolver and opened it to find Frank standing in the hallway, hat in hand. "What?" "Just wanted to check in, boss. See if you needed anything." Silas studied him. Frank was loyal enough, but only because being disloyal to Silas Crow was a death sentence. The man's loyalty was purchased through terror, and Silas could see it in his eyes every time they talked. That nervous energy, that constant calculation of how to avoid angering him. "I'm fine. Go away." "Yes, sir. Good night, sir." Frank disappeared down the hall and Silas closed the door. He went back to cleaning the revolver, running the cloth down the barrel with methodical precision. The metal caught the lamplight, gleaming like a promise. Respect. That's what he wanted. Real respect, not obedience. The kind of respect Mara Quinn carried naturally. The kind that made people want to be around you instead of running from you. The kind that came from something other than fear. He didn't know how to get it. All he knew was intimidation, violence, control through terror. Those were the tools his father had taught him, back when Silas was young, and his father was the scariest man in whatever town they'd landed in. Towns blurred together from his childhood, always frontier settlements, always places where his father could operate on the edges, taking what he wanted through force. "You want something in this world," his father used to say, whiskey on his breath and blood on his knuckles. "You take it. Anyone gets in your way, you move them. That's how men survive out here." Silas had learned the lesson well. Too well, maybe. He finished cleaning the revolver and holstered it, then lay back on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, Red Hollow was settling into night. He could hear distant laughter from the saloon, the sound of horses in the stable, the wind rattling through the wooden buildings. Somewhere out there, Mara Quinn was probably closing up her store, counting her receipts, living her life without giving him a second thought. And that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He'd tried approaching her before, a few times over the years. Never directly, never honestly. Just comments here and there, suggestions that maybe they could have dinner, maybe they could talk. She always declined, politely but firmly, with that same look in her eyes. The look that said she saw right through him, saw the hollowness at his core, saw that his power was built on sand and fear and nothing substantial. Silas closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd ride out to the canyon again, practice his draw, get faster, smoother, better, build a new reputation, a new kind of power, something beyond his fists and his scar and his ability to make people afraid. Maybe then Mara would look at him differently. Maybe then he'd deserve it. The next 3 months passed in a routine of intimidation and practice. Days in town, collecting debts and breaking the occasional nose when someone got too brave or too stupid. Evenings in the canyon, drawing and firing until his shoulder ached and his ears rang despite the cloth he stuffed in them. His reputation grew. People whispered about Silas Crow the Gunslinger now, not just Silas Crow the Brute. Stories spread about showdowns he'd supposedly won, men he'd supposedly killed, draws so fast they were barely visible. He did nothing to correct the stories. He encouraged them when he could, dropping hints, letting imagination do the heavy lifting. The truth was, he'd never shot anyone. Never even pointed his revolver at a living person. But the legend was more important than the truth. The legend was power. Red Hollow seemed smaller somehow as his reputation grew. People's fear evolved from the immediate terror of physical violence to a deeper, colder fear of sudden death. Merchants paid him faster now. Drifters avoided the town altogether when they heard he was around. Even Frank and the others in his crew seemed more careful, more respectful. But Mara Quinn's opinion never changed. He saw her around town, always busy, always competent, always carrying that quiet dignity that made him feel like a fraud. Once he'd stopped by her store with the excuse of needing supplies. She'd served him politely, efficiently, charging fair prices and making small talk about the weather. Nothing in her manner suggested she was impressed by his new reputation. Nothing suggested she saw him as anything other than what he'd always been. It gnawed at him. "You hear about Silas?" He heard someone say one evening, sitting in the saloon with his back to a corner table where two cowboys were drinking. What about him? They say he killed 3 men in Tombstone last year. Killed them all in the street, one after another, faster than lightning. That true? That's what I heard. They say he's the deadliest man in Arizona territory. Silas sipped his whiskey and said nothing, but inside he felt a twisted satisfaction. The legend was working. The fear was evolving. This was a better kind of power, cleaner somehow, more respectable. Except it wasn't real. And late at night, alone in his room, he knew it. Knew that his quick draw and his accurate aim meant nothing if he'd never actually tested them against another living person. Knew that all his practice, all his rumors, all his carefully constructed legend would crumble the moment someone with real experience called him out. He told himself it would never happen. Red Hollow was small, isolated. Real gunslingers, the kind who'd survived actual showdowns, who'd killed men in fair fights. They worked in bigger towns, places with real money, real stakes. Nobody like that would ever drift through Red Hollow. It was a comforting lie. He believed it right up until the afternoon a stranger rode into town. Silas was outside the saloon again, same post, same position, surveying his kingdom. The heat was particularly brutal that day, the kind that made you feel like the sun was personal, like it had something against you specifically. Most people were inside, hiding from the worst of it. So when the rider appeared at the end of the street, everyone noticed. He came from the east, a single figure on a paint horse, moving at an unhurried walk. Distance and heat shimmer made details hard to make out at first, but something about the way he sat his saddle caught Silas's attention. Confident, relaxed, not like the nervous drifters who usually pass through, eyes down and spines hunched, hoping to avoid notice. This man rode like he didn't care who noticed him. Silas straightened slightly, watching. The rider came closer, and details emerged. He was younger than Silas, maybe late 20s, lean rather than big. He wore dark pants and a light shirt, dusty from travel, but well-maintained. 2 revolvers hung at his hips in worn leather holsters. His hat was pulled low against the sun, shadowing his face. But it was his eyes that struck Silas when he got close enough to see them. They were calm. Not nervous calm or false calm, but genuinely, deeply calm. The eyes of a man who'd seen hard things and survived them, who'd been tested and come through, who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The rider stopped his horse in front of the saloon and dismounted smoothly. He tied the reins to the rail and stood there for a moment, looking around Red Hollow with the faint curiosity of someone seeing a new place. His gaze passed over Silas without pausing, without recognition, without fear. That should have been satisfying. Instead, it felt like an insult. "You lost?" Silas asked, his voice carrying that edge of aggression he used when establishing dominance. The stranger looked at him directly. Up close, his face was weathered but young, with the kind of tired handsomeness that came from hard living. He had a thin scar on his chin and steady gray eyes that gave away nothing. "Don't think so," the stranger said. His voice was quiet, controlled. "This is Red Hollow?" "It is." "Then I'm where I meant to be." Silas pushed off the post and stepped closer. Around them, the street was starting to fill. People were emerging from buildings, sensing something in the air. Word spread fast in small towns. Stranger in town, possible trouble. Silas Crow paying attention. "We don't get many visitors," Silas said. "Especially not the armed type." The stranger glanced down at his revolvers like he'd forgotten they were there. "These? Just tools, same as a hammer or a saw." "Dangerous tools." "All tools are dangerous if you don't know how to use them." Silas felt his jaw tighten. There was something in the man's tone, something that felt like mockery even though the words were neutral. Frank appeared at his elbow, always nearby when trouble might be brewing. "Got a name?" Silas asked. "I do." Silence stretched. Silas waited, but the stranger didn't elaborate, just stood there, calm and infuriating, like he had all the time in the world. "You planning to share it?" Silas finally asked, his voice hardening. "Rowan Vane." The name meant nothing to Silas. He'd heard plenty of gunslinger names over the years: Hickok, Hardin, Holiday, Earp, but Rowan Vane wasn't among them. Either this man was nobody, or he was somebody who kept a low profile. Neither option sat well with Silas. "Well, Rowan Vane," Silas said, stepping closer still, using his size advantage. Red Hollow operates under certain rules. You follow them, we'll get along fine. You don't, we'll have problems. Rowan tilted his head slightly, like Silas was a mildly interesting puzzle. What kind of rules? My rules. I see. Rowan looked around again, taking in the people watching from windows and doorways, the tense set of Frank's shoulders, the way Silas was positioning himself for intimidation. And what happens if someone doesn't follow these rules? I make them regret it. How? The question was so simple, so direct, that it caught Silas off guard. What? How do you make them regret it? You hurt them? Threaten their families? Burn their property? Silas felt heat crawl up his neck again. Something about this conversation was slipping away from him, getting away from the script he was used to. All of the above, if necessary. Rowan nodded slowly, like Silas had just confirmed something he already suspected. So you rule through fear. I rule through strength. There's a difference? Damn right there is. Interesting, Rowan said, but his tone suggested he didn't find it interesting at all. Well, I appreciate the information. I'll be staying a few days if that's acceptable. I'll follow whatever reasonable rules exist, pay for what I use, and cause no trouble. He moved to step past Silas toward the saloon. Silas's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. It was instinct, reflex, the same move he'd used 1,000 times to establish physical dominance. He gripped hard, felt the lean muscle under Rowan's shirt, expected to see fear or anger in the man's eyes. Instead, Rowan just looked down at the hand on his arm, then back up at Silas's face. His expression hadn't changed, still calm, still controlled. You should let go now, Rowan said quietly. Or what? Or you'll force me to do something I'd rather avoid. The threat was delivered without heat, without bravado, just a simple statement of fact. Silas held the grip a moment longer, pride demanding it, fear suggesting otherwise, then released him. Rowan nodded slightly, like Silas had made the right choice. Then he walked into the saloon, leaving Silas standing in the street with Frank and a dozen watching faces. Boss? Frank said quietly. You want me to… No, Silas cut him off. His mind was racing. Something about that encounter had gone wrong, though he couldn't quite identify what. He'd been aggressive, physical, dominant, all his usual tools, but somehow Rowan had walked away looking unbothered while Silas felt off balance. Who is he? Frank asked. Nobody, Silas said, but he didn't believe it. Find out everything you can about Rowan Vane. Talk to people, send telegrams, whatever it takes. I want to know who he is. Yes, sir. Frank hurried off. Silas stood in the street, staring at the saloon doors. Inside, Rowan would be ordering a drink, finding a table, settling in like any normal traveler. But Silas's instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive through years of violence, were screaming that Rowan Vane was anything but normal. Mara Quinn appeared at his side so quietly he hadn't noticed her approach. She stood next to him, following his gaze toward the saloon. You felt it too? She asked. Silas glanced at her. Felt what? That he's different, not like the others who passed through. He's just another drifter. No, Mara said softly. He's not. She walked away before Silas could respond, heading back toward her store. He watched her go, then looked back at the saloon. Through the window, he could just make out Rowan sitting at a table, a glass in front of him, his hat off now, looking like he belonged there. Silas's hand drifted to his revolver, touching the worn grip. His quick draw. His carefully practiced skills. His constructed reputation as the fastest gun in the territory. Maybe it was time to prove it wasn't all legend. Maybe it was time to show Red Hollow and Mara Quinn that he was more than just fists and fear. Maybe it was time to make Rowan Vane understand whose town this was. The thought should have felt good, should have felt powerful, righteous, strong. Instead, for reasons Silas couldn't explain, it felt like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air pressure drops and something primal in your gut tells you to find shelter. He ignored the feeling. He'd ignored better instincts before. That evening, he rode out to the canyon one more time, drew and fired until the sun set. His draw was smooth now, practiced, quick. He was good. He told himself he was good enough. In the gathering darkness, he holstered his revolver and rode back toward town, rehearsing in his mind what he would say, how he would challenge Rowan, how he would end this before it became a problem. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd make his move. Tomorrow he'd prove that Silas Crow was every bit the legend people whispered about. Tomorrow would change everything. He just didn't realize how right he was. Silas didn't sleep well that night. He lay in his narrow bed listening to the sounds of Red Hollow settling into darkness, distant voices, a dog barking somewhere, the creak of wood adjusting to cooler air. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rowan Vane's face, those calm gray eyes, that infuriating composure. Around 3 a.m, he gave up trying to sleep and sat by the window, smoking a cigarette he'd rolled badly. His hands were steadier with a gun than with tobacco paper. The street below was empty except for shadows and moonlight. Somewhere in town, Rowan was sleeping. Probably peacefully. Probably without a care in the world. The thought made Silas want to break something. He'd spent years building his reputation, first through violence and lately through carefully cultivated rumors about his speed with a pistol. He'd become someone people feared, someone they whispered about. And then this stranger rides into town and makes him feel like nothing with just a look and a few quiet words. No, not nothing. Worse than nothing. Hollow. Dawn came eventually, gray and reluctant. Silas dressed slowly, checking his revolver 3 times, even though he'd cleaned it the night before. The weight of it on his hip felt heavier than usual, like the gun knew what he was planning and wasn't sure about it. He walked downstairs and out into the street. Red Hollow was just waking up. Pete was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the saloon. Old man Garrett was opening his dry goods store, coughing into his fist the way he always did in the mornings. A wagon rolled past, the driver nodding nervously when he saw Silas. Everything normal. Everything the same. Except it wasn't. Something had shifted yesterday when Rowan rode in, and Silas could feel it in the air like the pressure before a thunderstorm. "Morning, boss," Frank said, appearing from an alley with his hat already dusty. The man never looked clean. "I asked around about that stranger. Nobody knows much." "What did you find out?" "He checked into the boarding house, paid for 3 days up front, cash. Said he's just passing through, looking for work maybe, nothing specific. Been polite to everyone." "That's it?" Frank shifted his weight. "Well, there's one thing. Last night at the saloon, a couple of the boys tried to get him talking. You know how it goes. Drinks, friendly conversation, see what a man's about." And he didn't bite. Answered questions without really answering them. Drank 1 beer and went to bed early. But Tommy, you know Tommy, talks too much when he's drunk. Tommy tried to get tough with him. Nothing serious, just the usual posturing, seeing if he'd scare. Silas felt his jaw tighten. What happened? Nothing. That's the thing. Rowan just looked at him. Didn't say a word, didn't move, just looked. And Tommy backed down. Said later that something about those eyes made him think twice. Said it was like looking at a man who'd already decided how a fight would end before it started. That matched what Silas had felt yesterday. That unsettling calm. That certainty. "Send word around," Silas said. I want everyone in the street at noon." Frank's eyebrows went up. "Everyone? Everyone? Tell them it's important. Tell them Silas Crow has something to prove, and they're going to want to see it." "Boss, you sure about this? We don't know who this guy really is." "I'm sure. Noon. Spread the word." Frank nodded and hurried off. Silas stood in the street, feeling the morning sun start to climb and heat the air. Noon was 5 hours away. 5 hours to prepare, to practice his draw a few more times, to get his mind right for what needed to happen. He walked to the edge of town and found a spot behind the livery stable. He drew and aimed at a fence post maybe 20 feet away. His hand was steady. His draw was smooth. He'd done this 1,000 times in practice. The revolver bucked in his hand and the fence post splintered. Good shot. Center mass. He holstered and drew again. Another good shot. His shoulder remembered the motion. His hand knew the weight. His eye found the target automatically. He was fast. He was accurate. He was ready. So why did his stomach feel like he'd swallowed rocks? Practicing? Silas spun around, his hand moving to his gun before he recognized the voice. Mara Quinn stood 10 feet away, holding a basket of what looked like vegetables from her store. She must have been making a delivery to one of the houses near the livery. "What are you doing here?" His voice came out sharper than he intended. "Walking. It's a free country, last I checked." She came closer, studying his face. You look like you didn't sleep. I slept fine. You're a terrible liar, Silas. You always have been. She set down her basket and crossed her arms. This is about that stranger, isn't it? Rowan. His name doesn't matter. Everything matters, names especially. She paused, watching him. You're going to call him out, aren't you? Challenge him in the street like some dime novel. Someone needs to show him how things work here. No, someone needs to prove something to himself, and that's much more dangerous. Mara's voice was soft but firm. Silas, I've known you for 5 years. I've seen you break men twice your size. I've seen you terrify this whole town, but I've also seen what's underneath all that. You don't know anything about what's underneath, don't I? She took a step closer. You want people to respect you, real respect, not fear. You want to matter in a way that doesn't require broken bones and burnt barns. You look at people like me and you wonder why they don't see you the way you want to be seen. Her words hit too close to truths Silas had spent years avoiding. You finished? Not quite. That man who rode in yesterday, Rowan Vane, he's not like the others you've intimidated. I don't know his story, but I know men, and he's the kind who's already survived the worst things life can throw at him. You can see it in how he moves, how he looks at the world. He's not afraid of you because he's been afraid of much worse and came through it. Then maybe it's time someone taught him to be afraid again. Mara shook her head slowly. Or maybe it's time someone learned the difference between power and strength, between fear and respect, between what you are and what you could be. I know what I am. Do you? Because from where I stand, you're a man who spent so long playing a part that he doesn't remember who he was before he put on the costume. She picked up her basket. Whatever you're planning for noon, think about what you're really trying to prove. And think about whether the person you're trying to prove it to is Rowan Vane or yourself. She walked away, leaving Silas standing in the dust behind the livery stable with his revolver in his hand and her words echoing in his head. He holstered the gun and went back to town. The hours crawled by. Word spread fast the way it always did in Red Hollow. By mid-morning, everyone knew something was coming at noon. Shops started closing early. People gathered in small groups, talking in low voices. The excitement was palpable. Not happy excitement, but the nervous energy that comes from knowing violence is about to happen and being unable to look away. Silas spent the time in his room, checking his gun again and again. Loading, unloading, spinning the cylinder, checking the action. Everything worked perfectly. Everything was ready. Except him. Mara's words kept circling in his head like vultures. What are you trying to prove? Who are you trying to prove it to? He pushed the thoughts away. This was necessary. This was about maintaining order, showing strength, proving that Red Hollow belonged to Silas Crow, and anyone who didn't understand that needed to be educated. Rowan had disrespected him yesterday, treated him like he was nothing, and that couldn't stand. At 11:30, Silas strapped on his gun belt and checked himself in the small mirror on his wall. The scar on his face looked darker in the dim light. His eyes looked tired. He looked older than his 34 years. He looked like a man pretending to be something he wasn't. No. He was a gunslinger. He was fast. He'd practiced for months. He was ready. He went downstairs and walked toward the center of town. People were already gathering, lining the street, standing on boardwalks, peering from windows. Frank stood near the saloon with 3 other men from Silas's crew. Pete had emerged from behind his bar to watch. Old man Garrett was there, and the rancher whose debt Silas had collected, and the shopkeeper who always called him Mr. Crow in that terrified voice. And Mara. She stood near her store, arms crossed, face expressionless. But her eyes found Silas's across the distance, and in them he saw something that looked like disappointment. That stung worse than any insult Rowan could have delivered. The clock in the church tower, Red Hollow's only piece of architectural ambition, began to chime noon. The sound rang out across the town. 12 slow bells that felt like a countdown. On the 8th bell, the door to the boarding house opened and Rowan Vane stepped out. He looked exactly the same as yesterday. Same worn clothes, same 2 revolvers, same calm expression. He walked down the steps and into the street, moving without hurry. When he saw the crowd, he stopped and looked around, understanding dawning on his face. "Rowan Vane!" Silas called out. His voice carried across the silent street. "We need to talk." Rowan turned to face him. They were maybe 60 feet apart, the distance feeling both too far and too close. "About what?" About respect. About understanding how things work in Red Hollow. I see. Rowan glanced at the crowd, at the expectant faces, at the tension in the air. You've staged quite a show. This isn't a show. This is how we settle things here. We don't have anything to settle. I've done nothing to you. You disrespected me yesterday. You walked into my town and acted like I didn't matter. Rowan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, still controlled. Your town, you own the land, the buildings, the people. I run things here. Through fear. Through strength. There's a difference? Rowan echoed Mara's earlier words, though he couldn't have known she'd said them. I don't think there is. Not the way you practice it. Anger flared in Silas's chest, hot and familiar. This was what he'd wanted, to get Rowan talking, to draw him into the confrontation. But something about the way the conversation was going felt wrong, like he was being led somewhere he didn't want to go. You wear 2 guns, Silas said, changing tactics. That suggests you know how to use them. I know how to use them. Then prove it, the crowd murmured. Silas could feel their anticipation, their fear, their hunger to see what would happen. This was power, having 100 people hold their breath waiting for your next move. But Rowan just shook his head. No. What? I said no. I'm not going to draw on you. Confusion and rage mixed in Silas's gut. You scared? Cautious. There's a difference. You're scared, Silas insisted, louder now. You talk tough, but when it comes down to it, you're just another coward hiding behind a reputation. Rowan's expression didn't change. Think what you want. I challenge you, Silas said, hearing desperation creep into his own voice. Right here, right now, you and me. Let's see who's really the fastest. To what end? If I refuse, you get to tell everyone I'm a coward. If I accept, one of us probably dies. Either way, you win something and I lose something. That's not a fair deal. Life isn't fair. No, it isn't. But that doesn't mean I have to participate in your theater. Rowan started to turn away. I'll be leaving town tomorrow morning. You can claim whatever victory you want after I'm gone. Don't you walk away from me. Silas's hand dropped to his revolver. He didn't draw, not yet, but the threat was clear. The crowd gasped. Frank took a step forward, then stopped, unsure what to do. Rowan turned back slowly. For the first time, something flickered in his calm expression, not fear, something colder. That would be a mistake, Rowan said quietly. You threatening me? I'm advising you. There's a difference. The only difference is that I'm still standing and you're about to run. I'm trying to save your life. The words were spoken without arrogance, without bravado. Just a simple statement of fact delivered in that same level tone. And somehow that made them more frightening than any threat Silas had ever heard. You can't save something already dead, Silas said, and drew. His hand moved exactly like he'd practiced 1,000 times. Smooth, fast, controlled. The revolver came up, his thumb cocking the hammer, his finger finding the trigger. He was fast. He was good. But Rowan was already moving. It happened so quickly that Silas's mind couldn't quite process it. One moment Rowan was standing with his hands at his sides. The next, his right revolver was out and leveled. There was no wasted motion, no dramatic flourish. Just an economy of movement so perfect it looked effortless. Silas's gun was barely clearing the holster when he found himself staring down the barrel of Rowan's .45. Time stopped. The crowd was utterly silent. Silas stood frozen, his revolver halfway drawn, completely outmatched. Rowan could have fired, should have fired, by all the rules of gunfighting, but he didn't. He just stood there, his gun steady, his eyes locked on Silas's. Put it away, Rowan said softly. Silas's hand was shaking. He could feel it, could see it. Everyone could see it. The mighty Silas Crow, terror of Red Hollow, standing in the street with a trembling hand and a half-drawn gun. Put it away, Rowan repeated. Please. The please broke something in Silas. Not his pride. That was already shattered. Something deeper, some fundamental understanding of who he was and what he'd been pretending to be. He holstered his revolver. Rowan lowered his gun but didn't holster it immediately. He kept it in his hand, pointed at the ground, just in case Silas decided to be stupid. The crowd remained frozen, watching. I don't want to kill you, Rowan said. I don't want to kill anyone. I came to Red Hollow because it was quiet, because I thought I could pass through without trouble. I was wrong. You humiliated me, Silas said. His voice sounded hollow even to himself. No, you humiliated yourself. You forced a confrontation that didn't need to happen because your pride couldn't let a stranger ride through town without establishing dominance. That's not strength. That's insecurity. Each word landed like a physical blow. Around them, the crowd was beginning to murmur. Silas could feel their perception shifting, could feel the foundation of fear he'd built his empire on starting to crack. You want to know what real strength looks like? Rowan continued. It looks like walking away from fights you don't need to have. It looks like being secure enough in yourself that you don't need to prove anything to anyone. It looks like earning respect through your actions, not demanding it through threats. You're lecturing me? I'm trying to help you, though I'm not sure you want to be helped. Rowan finally holstered his revolver. The motion was slow, deliberate, giving Silas every opportunity to make another stupid decision. Silas didn't move. Couldn't move. He felt paralyzed, caught between rage and shame, and a terrible understanding that everything Rowan was saying was true. I'll leave at dawn, Rowan said. I suggest you use the time between now and then to think about what kind of man you want to be. Because the man you are right now, the one who rules through fear and builds his reputation on lies, that man is empty. And eventually, empty men collapse under their own weight. Rowan turned and walked back toward the boarding house. The crowd parted for him, people stepping aside, eyes wide. No one spoke. No one moved to stop him. Silas stood alone in the middle of the street, feeling 100 pairs of eyes on him. He could see the judgment in their faces, the shock, the dawning realization that the man they'd feared for so long had just been exposed as a fraud. Frank approached cautiously. Boss, you all right? Get away from me. But boss, I said get away. Frank retreated. The crowd began to disperse, slowly at first, then faster as people realized there was nothing more to see. The show was over. The legend was broken. Silas stood there until the street was empty except for him and Mara. She walked over slowly, her face unreadable. Don't, he said before she could speak. Whatever you're going to say, don't. I was just going to ask if you were hurt. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're bleeding. Silas looked down. He hadn't even realized, but his hands were clenched so tightly that his nails had cut into his palms. Blood dripped onto the dust. Come on, Mara said gently. Let me clean those up. I don't need your help. Maybe not, but I'm offering it anyway. She took his arm and led him toward her store. He didn't resist. Didn't have the energy to resist. Inside, she sat him down in a chair and brought water and cloth. She cleaned his hands carefully, wrapping them in clean bandages. He was faster than you, she said quietly. I know. Much faster. I know. All those months of practice, all those rumors you spread about your speed, they didn't mean anything when faced with someone who was actually good. I know! The words came out sharper than he intended. I know, all right? I know I'm a fraud. I know everything I built was a lie. I know I'm nothing. Mara finished bandaging his hands and sat back. That's not what I was going to say. Then what? I was going to say that now you have a choice. You can spend the rest of your life bitter about being exposed, angry at Rowan for showing everyone the truth. Or you can use this as an opportunity to become something real. Real, Silas laughed bitterly. I don't even know what that means. It means building a life based on something other than fear. It means earning respect instead of demanding it. It means being someone people want to follow instead of someone they're afraid to disobey. People will never respect me now. They saw what happened. They saw me shake. They saw me back down. They saw you choose life over pride. That's not weakness, Silas. That's the first smart decision you've made in years. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her face. She wasn't mocking him, wasn't enjoying his humiliation. She was genuinely trying to help, the way she probably helped everyone who came into her store. Why do you care? He asked. Because I've always seen that there was something better in you, buried under all the violence and fear. And maybe now, with all of that stripped away, that better person might have a chance to surface. Silas wanted to believe her. Wanted to think there was some path forward from this disaster. But the shame was too fresh, the humiliation too raw. He's leaving tomorrow, Silas said. Once he's gone, I can start rebuilding. People will forget what happened. Mara shook her head. People never forget. And you shouldn't want them to. What happened today was important. Important how? It showed everyone that the Emperor had no clothes. That fear is just fear, not actual power. Some people will hate you for that, true. But others might see it as an opening to step out from under your shadow, to build something better. You're talking about revolution. I'm talking about evolution. Red Hollow has been stuck under your thumb for years. Maybe now it can grow into something more. The words stung, but they were true. Silas had held this town in a grip of fear, and fear stifled everything: progress, hope, possibility. He stood up, his bandaged hands feeling strange. I need to think. Take your time. But Silas. She waited until he looked at her. Whatever you decide to do next, make sure it's a choice you can live with, not just for tomorrow, but for the rest of your life. He left the store and walked through Red Hollow as the afternoon heat pressed down. People avoided his eyes now, but it was different from before. Before, they'd avoided his eyes out of fear. Now they avoided them out of pity, or embarrassment, or maybe just awkwardness about witnessing someone's public destruction. He ended up at the saloon. Pete was behind the bar polishing glasses. When Silas walked in, the bartender tensed. Whiskey, Silas said. Pete poured without comment. Silas drank it standing at the bar, not bothering to sit. The alcohol burned going down, but didn't help. Nothing was going to help. You hear what people are saying? Silas asked. Pete hesitated. Some things. Tell me. Boss, I don't think Tell me. Pete set down the glass he was polishing. They're saying you're finished, that your time running this town is over. Some folks are happy about it. Others are nervous about what comes next. A few are talking about how maybe now they can speak up without worrying you'll break their faces. Each sentence was a nail in a coffin. Silas's coffin. The burial of everything he'd been. What do you think? Silas asked. Pete looked surprised by the question. Me? Yeah, you. What do you think about what happened? The bartender was quiet for a long moment. I think, he said carefully, that I've been scared of you for 3 years. Ever since you broke my nephew's arm because he spilled a drink on your table. He was 15, boss. Scared kid working his first job. And you broke his arm. Silas remembered. He'd barely thought about it at the time. Just another example of maintaining control, keeping people afraid. I'm not saying I'm glad you got humiliated, Pete continued. That's not it. But I'm saying that maybe Red Hollow can breathe a little easier now. Maybe people can make mistakes without worrying they'll end up in the dirt bleeding. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. So you're glad I'm finished. I'm glad we might have a chance to be something other than scared. Silas nodded slowly. He finished his whiskey and left money on the bar. More than the drink cost, though he wasn't sure why. Pete watched him go without saying anything else. Outside, the sun was starting to lower. Silas walked to the edge of town and found himself at the canyon where he'd practiced so many times. The fence post he'd shot that morning was still splintered, evidence of his speed, his accuracy, his inadequacy. He sat on a rock and watched the sunset paint the canyon walls orange and red. Somewhere in Red Hollow, Rowan Vane was preparing to leave in the morning. Somewhere, people were talking about what happened. Somewhere, the world was moving on while Silas sat and tried to figure out what came next. The truth was, he had no idea. All his life, he'd built his identity on being feared, on being the biggest, meanest, most dangerous person in any room. His father had taught him that was what mattered. That was how you survived. That was how you got respect. But it wasn't respect. Rowan had been right about that. It was just fear wearing respect's clothes. Real respect, the kind Mara commanded, the kind Rowan carried without trying, that came from somewhere else, from being good at something, from helping people, from having principles and sticking to them, from being someone worth following instead of someone too scary to disobey. Silas didn't know how to be that person, didn't know if he could learn. The sun dropped below the horizon, and darkness crept across the canyon. Silas sat until the stars came out, until the cold started seeping into his bones, until he couldn't put off returning to town any longer. When he finally walked back, Red Hollow was quiet. Lights glowed in windows. Somewhere someone was playing a piano badly. A dog barked. Normal sounds. Peaceful sounds. Silas realized he'd never really listened to those sounds before. He'd always been too busy being the source of tension, the reason for fear. He'd never just existed in Red Hollow as a person. He'd always been a force, a threat, a problem. Maybe that could change. Maybe. He went to the boarding house and up to his room, lay on his bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. His mind kept replaying the moment Rowan's gun had cleared leather while Silas's was still rising. The speed, the certainty, the absolute mastery. That was real skill. Everything Silas had pretended to be, Rowan actually was. And he'd walked away. Hadn't killed Silas, hadn't even wounded him. Had given him a chance to survive, to learn, to change. That took strength too. A different kind of strength than Silas had ever understood. Somewhere around midnight, he heard boots on the stairs, then a knock on his door. He opened it to find Frank standing there, looking nervous. "Boss, I just wanted to check on you. I'm fine." "Are you?" "Because if you're planning something, if you want to go after him while he's sleeping..." "No." Frank blinked. "No?" "No, he beat me fair. It's done." "But your reputation..." "My reputation was a lie, Frank. You know it. I know it. Now everyone knows it." Silas leaned against the door frame. "I'm not going after him. I'm not going to shoot him in his sleep or ambush him on the road. It's over." Frank studied his face, looking for the trick, the angle. "What happens now?" "I don't know, but I know what doesn't happen. Terror doesn't happen. Breaking bones for fun doesn't happen. Burning barns because someone's a week late on a payment doesn't happen. So what? You're just giving up? Walking away?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally starting to walk toward something instead of away from the truth." Frank shook his head slowly. "I don't understand you right now, boss. That makes two of us." After Frank left, Silas lay back down and finally, mercifully, fell asleep. His dreams were confused, fragmented. Images of his father, of Rowan, of Mara, of 100 frightened faces blending together. When he woke, dawn was breaking. He dressed and went downstairs. The street was empty except for one figure. Rowan Vane stood next to his horse, checking the saddle, preparing to leave. Silas walked over. Rowan saw him coming and straightened, his hand drifting toward his gun. Not drawing, just ready. Always ready. "I'm not here to start something," Silas said when he was close enough to speak normally. "Good. I'd hate to have to kill you after going to the trouble of not killing you yesterday." There was no humor in Rowan's voice, just fact. "I wanted to ask you something before you go," Silas said. Rowan waited. "How did you get so fast?" "Practice. Thousands of hours of it." "I practiced for months." "Months isn't enough. And you were practicing technique. I practiced survival." Rowan adjusted his horse's bridle. "You wanted to be fast so people would fear you. I needed to be fast so I could stay alive. The difference matters." "What's your story?" Silas asked. "Where did you learn?" Rowan was quiet for a moment. "That's not something I talk about." "Why?" "Because the past is the past. Talking about it doesn't change anything." He swung up into the saddle. "But I'll tell you this much. I've killed men. More than I wanted to. Each one weighed on me, even the ones who deserved it. That weight is what you were missing yesterday. You wanted to be a killer without understanding what killing actually costs." "What does it cost?" "Everything." Rowan looked down at him. "You got lucky yesterday, Silas Crow. You got a second chance that a lot of men don't get. Don't waste it trying to become what you think I am. Become something better." "I don't know how." "Start by being honest. With yourself and everyone else. Build from there." Rowan clicked his tongue and his horse started walking. Silas watched him ride down the empty street and out of Red Hollow, heading west toward wherever his road led next. When Rowan was out of sight, Silas turned and found himself facing Mara. She'd emerged from her store and stood on the boardwalk, arms crossed, watching. "You let him go," she said. "Didn't have much choice." "You had choices. You could have gathered your men and tried to ambush him, could have shot him in the back just now, could have made a lot of stupid decisions. But I didn't." "No," Mara agreed. "You didn't. They stood in silence for a moment, the morning sun climbing, Red Hollow waking up around them. "So what now?" Silas asked. "Now you figure out who you actually are, instead of who you've been pretending to be. And if I can't, then you'll spend the rest of your life as a cautionary tale. The bully who got exposed and never recovered." She came down the steps and stood in front of him. "But I don't think that's what's going to happen." "Why not?" "Because you're standing here talking to me instead of drinking yourself stupid or plotting revenge. That's progress." "It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like failure." Sometimes they look the same from the inside. Mara started walking toward her store, then paused. "My store opens in an hour. I could use help moving some inventory from the back room to the shelves. It's honest work, nothing glamorous. Pays fair, but not much. You interested?" Silas stared at her. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a start. What you do with it is up to you." She went inside, leaving him standing in the street. Silas looked around at Red Hollow, the town he'd terrorized for years, the place that now knew his legend was hollow. He could leave. Pack his things and ride out, find some other town where no one knew his name, start over somewhere fresh. That would be easier. Or he could stay. Face the people he'd hurt, live with the shame of his exposure, try to build something real from the ruins of his false reputation. That would be harder. Silas thought about his father, about the lessons he'd learned growing up, about fear and power and violence, about the man he'd become following those lessons. Then he thought about Rowan's calm eyes and Mara's steady voice and the weight of honest work. He went to his room and packed his few possessions. But instead of saddling a horse and leaving, he carried his bag to the back of Mara's store and knocked on the door. She opened it, unsurprised. "Where do you want me to start?" he asked. Mara smiled, not a big smile, not celebrating, just a small acknowledgement of a choice made. "There are boxes in the back room that need to be unpacked and organized," she said. "Think you can handle that without breaking anything?" "I'll try. That's all anyone can do." She led him inside, and Silas Crow, former terror of Red Hollow, exposed fraud, failed gunslinger, started the long, unglamorous work of becoming someone different. It wasn't redemption, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was a beginning. The boxes were heavier than Silas expected. Not impossibly heavy, not the kind of weight that required his size and strength, just honest weight that required honest effort. Flour sacks, canned goods, bolts of fabric, tools wrapped in oiled paper. Normal things for normal people living normal lives. He'd spent years taking money from people who sold these things. Never once had he thought about the work involved in getting them onto shelves. Mara worked beside him for the first hour, showing him her system. Canned goods organized by type, then alphabetically. Dry goods on the lower shelves where they were easier to reach. Tools hung on pegboards with outlines drawn in chalk so customers could see what was missing. Everything had a place, a logic, a purpose. "You're quiet," she said around mid-morning when they'd made decent progress. "Thinking." "About?" How much easier it was to just take things than to organize them properly. Mara paused, a tin of peaches in her hand. "That's probably the most honest thing you've ever said to me." "Yeah, well, honesty seems to be the theme of my week." He lifted another box onto the counter. "This one's lighter. What's in it?" "Sewing supplies, needles, thread, buttons. Goes in the back corner by the fabric." Silas carried it where she indicated and started unpacking. Tiny spools of thread in every color imaginable. Cards of buttons, bone and wood, and shell. Packets of needles so thin they looked like they'd break if you breathed on them wrong. The delicacy of it all felt foreign in his rough hands. "You don't have to do this, you know," Mara said from across the room. "You offered me the job." "I did. But I also know what it costs you to be here. People are going to talk. They already are talking. Silas Crow, working in a store like some common laborer. Silas Crow, brought so low he's organizing thread for Mara Quinn. Let them talk." "Will you, though? Really? Because when Frank comes through that door, or any of your old crew, and they see you here, what then?" Silas set down a card of buttons and turned to face her. "Then they see me here. I'm done pretending to be something I'm not. If that means working in a store, so be it. That's good. Hold on to that feeling when the first person laughs at you." She wasn't being cruel, just realistic. Silas appreciated that more than false comfort would have offered. The morning passed slowly. Around 10, the first customers started arriving. An older woman Silas recognized but didn't know by name came in looking for lamp oil. She stopped dead when she saw him behind the counter, her eyes going wide. "Morning, Mrs. Chen," Mara said smoothly. "Lamp oil is on the far wall, second shelf. Silas, could you help her carry it? Those bottles are heavy." It was a test. Silas knew it. Mrs. Chen knew it. The woman looked like she was about to bolt. "I can manage," Mrs. Chen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I insist," Mara said. "Silas?" He walked over to where the lamp oil was stored, trying to move slowly, trying not to loom. Mrs. Chen watched him like he was a rattlesnake that might strike at any moment. He picked up one of the bottles. She was right, they were heavy, and carried it to the counter. "Anything else?" he asked, keeping his voice level. Mrs. Chen shook her head rapidly, paid Mara too quickly, and practically fled the store with her purchase. "Well," Mara said once she was gone, "that went about as well as expected." She was terrified. "You broke her son's jaw 2 years ago. He smiled at a girl you were talking to. You decided that was disrespectful." The memory came back slowly. A young man, maybe 19, who'd made eye contact with Silas at the wrong moment. Silas had taken it as a challenge, had reacted with casual violence, had thought nothing of it afterward. Just another example of maintaining control. "I don't even remember his name," Silas said quietly. "Tommy Chen. He still has trouble eating hard food." The shame hit like a physical blow. Silas gripped the counter, his bandaged hands aching. "I can't take that back." "No, you can't. But you can make sure you never do it again. And maybe, over time, people like Mrs. Chen will stop being afraid of you. Or maybe they won't. Maybe I've done too much. Maybe. But giving up because it's hard isn't an option. Not if you actually want to change." More customers came throughout the day. Some didn't recognize Silas at first, hidden as he was in the back room or behind stacks of inventory. When they did recognize him, reactions varied. Shock, mostly. Confusion. A few people left immediately. Others stayed but kept their distance, watching him like he might explode at any moment. One man, a farmer named Dutch, who Silas had once extorted for protection money, actually laughed. "Well, well," Dutch said, his voice carrying across the store. "The mighty Silas Crow, packing boxes. How the world turns." Silas felt heat rise in his chest. The old anger, the old reflex. His hands clenched and he started to move forward before Mara's voice stopped him. "Dutch, you need something or are you just here to gawk?" "Just appreciating the view, Mara. It's not every day you see a tyrant brought low." "Then you've had your look. Buy something or move along." Dutch's smile faded slightly. He muttered something about coming back later and left. Silas stood in the middle of the store, fists still clenched, breathing hard. "You did good," Mara said. "I didn't do anything." Exactly. Old Silas would have broken his teeth. New Silas stood there and took it. That's progress. It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like being a coward. There's a difference between cowardice and self-control. You're learning which is which. By the time Mara closed the store at 6, Silas was exhausted in a way he'd never experienced from violence. His muscles ached from lifting and carrying. His back hurt from bending over boxes. But more than that, his mind was worn out from the constant effort of not reacting, not lashing out, not falling back into old patterns. "You did well today," Mara said, counting out the day's receipts. "Better than I expected, honestly." "You expected me to quit? Or throw someone through a window? I had money on the window." It took Silas a moment to realize she was joking. When he did, something in his chest loosened slightly. Not much, but enough to feel different. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "If you're willing." "I'm willing." He walked out into the evening air. Red Hollow was settling into dusk, lights appearing in windows, the saloon starting to fill with its nightly crowd. Silas walked past it without going in. He could hear laughter inside, voices raised in conversation. Normal sounds. He'd spent so many nights in that saloon, drinking and intimidating, making sure everyone knew he was watching. Tonight he kept walking. Frank caught up with him near the boarding house. "Boss, we need to talk." "About what?" "About what happens now. The crew is confused. Nobody knows if you're still in charge, if we're still together, what the plan is." Silas stopped walking and turned to face him. There is no crew, Frank. There is no plan. It's over. Over? Just like that? Just like that. Frank's face went through several expressions: confusion, anger, something that might have been fear. But what are we supposed to do? You built this thing. You can't just walk away from it. Yes, I can. And I am. So we're supposed to fend for ourselves? After everything? After everything, Silas repeated. Yeah, you'll figure it out. Get honest work. Leave town, whatever you want. But the days of running protection rackets and breaking bones for money are done. You're serious? Completely. Frank stared at him for a long moment. You know what people are saying about you, right? They're saying you're finished, that you got scared and gave up, that Rowan Vane broke you. Let them say it. It doesn't bother you. It bothers me. But not as much as looking at myself in the mirror and seeing what I'd become bothered me. Silas started walking again. Go home, Frank. Find a new path. This one's closed. He left Frank standing in the street and went up to his room. The space felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. He'd lived here for 3 years, in this single room with a narrow bed and a wash basin and nothing much else. It had been enough when he was spending most of his time terrorizing people. Now it felt like a cell. He lay down without undressing and stared at the ceiling. His body ached from the day's work. His hands throbbed under their bandages. But underneath the physical discomfort was something else. Not peace exactly, but maybe the absence of the constant tension that had defined his life for so long. He'd spent years coiled tight, ready to react to any perceived threat with immediate violence. Always watching, always calculating, always ready to hurt someone before they could hurt him. It was exhausting in a way he'd never acknowledged. Maybe being exhausted from honest work was better. Sleep came eventually, dreamless and heavy. The next morning started the same way. Mara opened the store at 7, and Silas showed up 5 minutes later. More boxes, more inventory, more organizing. More customers who stared or whispered or left quickly. A few brave souls actually spoke to him, though their conversations were stilted and awkward. Morning, a young woman said, coming to the counter with a bag of flour. Silas rang it up on the mechanical till Mara had shown him how to use. That'll be 30 cents. She counted out the coins carefully and handed them over. Their fingers touched briefly, and she flinched like he'd burned her. Sorry, she said immediately. I didn't mean... It's fine, Silas said, though it wasn't fine. Have a good day. She left quickly, clutching her flour like it was precious cargo. Mara had watched the whole exchange from where she was restocking shelves. That was Sarah Miller, she said. I don't know her. You should. 3 years ago, her brother got drunk and bumped into you on the street. You beat him so badly he couldn't work for 2 months. They almost lost their farm because of it. Another memory Silas had buried. Another casual cruelty he'd inflicted without thought. The weight of it pressed down on his shoulders. How many people in this town have I hurt? He asked. Most of them, directly or indirectly. Then why are you helping me? Mara set down the canned goods she was holding and came over to the counter. Because I believe people can change. And because Red Hollow needs to see that change is possible. If someone like you, someone who was as bad as you were, if you can become better, then maybe there's hope for all of us. That's a lot of weight to put on me. You put it on yourself when you spent years being the worst person in town. Now you get to carry it while trying to be better. It was harsh but fair. Silas nodded and went back to work. The days began to blur together. Wake up, go to the store, work until closing, go back to his room. Repeat. The routine was numbing but also grounding. Each day he learned more about running a store, about treating customers fairly, about the small interactions that built trust over time. He learned that Mrs. Patterson always bought the same items every Tuesday, that old man Garrett liked to haggle, even though Mara's prices were already fair, that the Henderson kids came in after school for penny candy and had to be watched carefully because they liked to pocket extra pieces when they thought no one was looking. You going to break their fingers? Mara asked one afternoon when she caught him watching the kids. What? No, I was just... He paused. Old me would have, wouldn't he? Old you broke a 10-year-old's hand for stealing an apple. Silas felt sick. He didn't remember that specific incident, but he believed it. He'd done so many terrible things they all ran together. What should I do? He asked. About the Henderson kids? Nothing. They take a few extra pieces of candy. I factor it into my costs. They're good kids from a poor family. A few cents of candy won't ruin me. But it's stealing. It is. And if it became a real problem, I'd talk to their mother. But right now it's just kids being kids. You have to learn to tell the difference between real problems and small things that don't matter. Everything mattered before, every slight, every disrespect, every tiny thing that could be seen as weakness. I know, that's what made you so exhausting to be around. You were like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap at any moment. She said it casually, not trying to hurt him, just stating fact. But it hurt anyway because it was true. A week passed, then 2. The town slowly adjusted to the new reality of Silas Crow working at Mara's store. The initial shock wore off into something like reluctant acceptance. People still avoided him when they could, still watched him carefully when they couldn't, but the raw terror started to fade. Small changes started appearing around Red Hollow. The merchants who'd been paying Silas protection money stopped leaving payments at the saloon. Nobody came to collect. A few people who'd left town to escape Silas's violence started drifting back. The atmosphere shifted, loosened, became something closer to what a normal town felt like. But not everyone was happy about the changes. Frank showed up at the store 3 weeks after Rowan had left town. He looked rough, unshaven, his clothes dirty, his eyes carrying the kind of desperation that came from running out of options. "I need to talk to you," he said when Silas answered the store's back door during a break. "So talk." "Not here. Somewhere private." Silas glanced back into the store where Mara was helping a customer. "I've got 15 minutes. Make it quick." They walked to the alley behind the store. Frank paced like a caged animal. "The crew is falling apart," he said without preamble. "Without you running things, without the protection money coming in, we've got nothing. Tommy left town last week. Dutch is talking about heading to California. Me, I'm broke. We're all broke. Get jobs." "Doing what? Who's going to hire us? Everyone in this town knows what we were. What we did? We're marked now." "Then leave town. Start over somewhere else." "With what money?" Frank's voice rose, desperate and angry. "You bled this town dry for years and we helped. Now you've decided to grow a conscience and we're supposed to just figure it out?" Silas leaned against the wall, feeling tired. "What do you want from me, Frank?" "I want you to be who you were. I want you to stop playing store clerk and remember that you're Silas Crow. People feared you. That meant something." "It meant nothing. It was hollow. It put money in our pockets. Through extortion and violence. So what? This is the frontier. That's how things work out here. The strong take from the weak. You taught us that." "I was wrong." Frank stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Wrong? You built an empire. I built nothing. I took things that belonged to other people and called it strength. That's not empire building. That's just theft with pretension. You've gone soft. That gunslinger broke something in you." "No," Silas said quietly. "He showed me what was already broken. I just finally stopped lying to myself about it." Frank's face went through several emotions before settling on anger. "Fine. You want to be weak, but don't expect the rest of us to follow you into poverty and shame." "I don't expect anything from you. Do whatever you want, Frank. Just do it without hurting people. You think you're better than us now? Because you stack boxes for Mara Quinn? Because you let that stranger humiliate you without fighting back?" "I think I'm trying to be better than I was. That's all." Frank spat in the dirt. "You're pathetic." He stormed off before Silas could respond. Silas watched him go, feeling the weight of the conversation settle onto his shoulders. Frank wasn't wrong about everything. The people who'd followed Silas, who'd built their lives around his reign of terror, they were suffering now. That was on him too. But going back wasn't an option. He'd seen behind the curtain, seen the hollowness of everything he'd built. There was no unseeing that. When he went back inside, Mara was waiting. "I heard some of that," she said. "You okay?" "Not particularly, but I'll manage." "Frank's angry." "Frank's scared. Anger's just how it comes out." "You think he'll try something?" Silas considered that. "Maybe. Probably not against me directly, but he might try to restart the protection rackets on his own. Get the crew back together, operate without me." "What should we do about that?" "We should watch and wait. If he starts hurting people, we'll stop him. But if he just leaves town, we let him go." Mara nodded slowly. You're thinking like someone who cares about more than just himself. That's new. Everything's new. Doesn't mean I'm good at it yet. The afternoon continued. More customers, more small interactions, more learning how to be someone different. Near closing time, old man Garrett came in looking agitated. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" Mara asked. Dutch and some of the others, former Silas's crew, they're over at the saloon talking loud about how things need to go back to how they were, how Silas had the right idea and Red Hollow's gotten soft. Silas felt his jaw tighten. "How many?" "5, maybe 6. They're drunk and getting drunker. Pete's worried they're going to start trouble." Mara looked at Silas. "You thinking what I'm thinking? That I need to go talk to them. That could go bad quickly." "It could. But if I don't, they might hurt someone. And that would be my fault for creating them in the first place." He took off his work apron and hung it on the peg by the door. His revolver was upstairs in his room. He'd stopped wearing it to the store. Probably should have kept it closer, but going armed to stock shelves had felt wrong. "I'm coming with you," Mara said. "No." "Yes. They might not listen to you, but they'll think twice about starting a fight with me watching. I'm the only person in this town who is never afraid of any of you." She had a point. They walked together to the saloon, drawing stares from people on the street. Inside, it was exactly like old man Garrett had described. Frank sat at a center table with 5 other men, Tommy, Dutch, and 3 others whose names Silas only half remembered. Empty bottles crowded the table. The men were loud, aggressive, working themselves up to something. The conversation died when Silas walked in. "Well, well," Dutch said, his words slurring slightly. "The shopkeeper arrives. Come to sell us some flour, Silas?" The others laughed. It was forced, performative, the kind of laughter meant to establish dominance. "I came to tell you to go home," Silas said. "Or what?" Frank asked. "You going to fight all of us? You going to show us that legendary speed you supposedly have?" "I'm not going to fight anyone. I'm asking you, as someone who used to lead you, to go home, sleep it off, make better decisions in the morning." Tommy stood up unsteadily. "You used to lead us. Used to. Now you're nothing. Just another coward who got broken by a real man." Silas absorbed the insult without reacting. "Maybe I am, but at least I'm trying to be better than I was." "What are you trying to be?" "Rich," Tommy said. "Respected, feared." "Those aren't the same things." "They're out here. This is the frontier. The strong survive and the weak serve. You taught us that." "I taught you wrong." Frank stood up now too, steadier than Tommy, but just as angry. "We're starting things back up. The protection rackets, the collections, all of it. With or without you. But it'd be easier with you." "No." "Then we'll do it alone. And when people don't pay, when they resist, we'll make examples, just like you used to." "And then what?" Mara's voice cut across the saloon. She'd been quiet until now, but her words carried weight. "You make examples. People get hurt. Eventually someone fights back or word reaches the territorial marshal. Then you end up hanged or shot. Is that the future you want?" "Better than starving," Dutch said. "Is it? Because from where I stand, starving might be slower, but at least you don't end up dancing on a rope." The men exchanged glances. The alcohol-fueled bravado was starting to crack, reality seeping in through the gaps. "What else are we supposed to do?" Frank asked, and for a moment he sounded less angry and more genuinely lost. "We've got no skills except violence. No one will hire us. We're trapped." Silas took a step forward. "You're not trapped. You're scared. There's a difference." "Easy for you to say. You've got work." "Because I asked for it. Because I swallowed my pride and knocked on a door and said I needed help. You could do the same." "Who would help us?" "I don't know, but you won't find out sitting in a saloon drinking and planning to hurt people." The conversation hung in a delicate balance. Silas could see the men wavering, caught between the comfortable anger of their current path and the uncertain difficulty of trying something different. Then Tommy ruined it. "This is all talk," he said loudly. "You're all cowards, every one of you." He pulled a revolver from his belt and aimed it at Silas. The alcohol made his hand shake, but at this distance, even a drunk man could hit his target. "Tommy, put the gun down," Frank said. "Why?" "He's the reason we're in this mess. He built this thing and then abandoned us. He deserves to—" The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. But it didn't come from Tommy's gun. Mara had moved faster than anyone expected, grabbing Pete's shotgun from behind the bar and firing a warning shot into the ceiling. Splinters rained down. Tommy dropped his revolver, ears ringing, eyes wide with shock. "Next one goes lower," Mara said calmly, the shotgun still raised. "And at this range, I won't miss." Nobody moved. The saloon was frozen. Everyone staring at Mara with her shotgun and her steady hands and her complete lack of fear. "Pete," she said, without taking her eyes off the men, "send someone for the marshal in Tombstone. Tell him we've got some men here who need escorting out of the territory." "Now, wait," Frank started. "No waiting. You pulled a gun on someone in my town. That's done. You're done. All of you can leave on your own or leave in chains. Your choice." Silas watched it all unfold with something like awe. This was real strength. Not the kind that came from fists or bullets, but the kind that came from knowing who you were and refusing to bend. The men looked at each other. The fight had gone out of them, replaced by the sobering realization that they'd crossed a line. "We'll leave," Frank said finally. "Tonight. We'll be gone by morning." "Good decision," Mara said. She lowered the shotgun but kept it ready. "Pete, make sure they go straight to pack. No stops, no detours." Pete nodded and followed the men out. They went quietly, shoulders slumped, the bravado completely deflated. When they were gone, Mara set the shotgun down and let out a long breath. "That," Silas said, "was impressive." "That was terrifying. My hands are shaking." He looked and saw she was right. Now that the danger had passed, her hands were trembling slightly. "You didn't show it. Never show weakness to drunk men with guns. Basic survival." Silas moved to the bar and poured 2 whiskeys. He handed one to Mara. She took it gratefully and drank it in one go. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For standing up for me. For this town. For showing what real strength looks like." Mara set down her glass and looked at him directly. "You would have talked them down eventually. You were doing fine." "Maybe. But you finished it." "Someone had to." She paused. "You really think they'll leave?" "Frank will. He's smart enough to know when he's beaten. The others will follow. They always follow." "And if they don't?" "Then we deal with it. Together." The word felt significant. Together. Not Silas alone terrorizing people into submission, but people working together to solve problems. It was such a simple concept, but it felt revolutionary. They walked back through Red Hollow as the night deepened. Lights glowed in windows. Somewhere a baby cried. Somewhere else someone was laughing. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. The sounds of a town that was slowly learning it didn't have to be afraid. "What you said back there," Mara said as they reached her store, "about asking for help, swallowing pride, that was good. It was the truth. Truth is good." She unlocked her door and paused. "Same time tomorrow? If you'll have me?" "I will. Good night, Silas." "Good night." He watched her go inside, then walked to the boarding house. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt. Silas stood in the street for a long moment, looking up, thinking about paths and choices, and the long road ahead. 3 weeks ago, he'd been the most feared man in Red Hollow. Now he was working in a store, getting insulted by former associates, and learning how to organize thread properly. It should have felt like failure, like defeat. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. Frank and his men were gone by sunrise. Silas knew because he'd barely slept, listening for sounds of trouble that never came. When dawn broke gray and cold, he walked through Red Hollow, checking the places they might have made a last stand. The saloon, the livery stable, the old warehouse where they used to meet. All empty. They'd kept their word and left. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like something sadder. Men he'd corrupted with his example, scattered to the wind with no skills except violence and no prospects except more of the same somewhere else. That was on him too, another weight to carry. He arrived at the store before Mara did, which was unusual. She found him sitting on the back step, watching the sun climb. "You look terrible," she said by way of greeting. "Didn't sleep much." Worried they'd come back? Worried about what happens to them now, where they go, what they become. Mara sat down next to him on the step. The morning was cold enough that their breath misted. You can't save everyone, Silas. Sometimes people have to save themselves. I know, doesn't make it easier. It's not supposed to be easy. If it was easy, it wouldn't mean anything. She stood and unlocked the door. Come on, work helps. Trust me on that. She was right. The routine of unpacking boxes and organizing inventory and helping customers gave Silas something to focus on beyond his guilt. The store was busier than usual. Word had spread about what happened at the saloon, and people came in partly for supplies and partly to see if the rumors were true. Was Silas Crow really working here? Had Mara really run off his crew with a shotgun? The attention made Silas uncomfortable, but he handled it. Answered questions when asked, stayed quiet when not. Let people see that he was different now, or at least trying to be. Around mid-morning, a man Silas didn't recognize came in. He was maybe 40, weathered and trail-worn, with the look of someone who'd spent his life working under the sun. He browsed the shelves for a few minutes, then approached the counter where Silas was working. "You Silas Crow?" he asked. Silas tensed instinctively. "I am. Name's Robert Hayes. I heard what happened here last week. Heard about the confrontation with that gunslinger, about how you backed down, about how you're working here now." "That's all true." Hayes studied him with sharp eyes. "I came from Silver Creek, town about 3 days' ride south of here. We've got a problem similar to what you used to be." "I don't understand." "There's a man there named Jessup, runs the town through fear, same as you did here. Protection rackets, violence, intimidation. People are scared to stand up to him." "I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't see what it has to do with me. I'm here to ask if you'd come back with me. Talk to him. Show him what happened to you. Maybe convince him to change before someone puts him in the ground." The request was so unexpected that Silas just stared for a moment. "You want me to what?" "Come talk to Jessup, man to man. Show him there's another way." "Why would he listen to me?" "Because you were him, and now you're not. That means something." Hayes leaned against the counter. "Look, I'm not asking you to fight him or threaten him. Just talk. Tell your story. Maybe it makes a difference. Maybe it doesn't. But we have to try something before this ends in blood." Mara had been listening from across the store. She came over now, wiping her hands on her apron. "How bad is it in Silver Creek?" she asked Hayes. "Bad. Jessup's got 5 men working for him. They collect from everyone, hurt anyone who resists. Last month they beat a shopkeeper so badly he still can't walk right. The month before that they burned down a barn because the owner was late with payment." It was like hearing about himself. Silas felt sick. "What makes you think I could help?" he asked. "Because you stopped. Whatever happened here, whatever that gunslinger showed you, it made you change. Maybe you can do the same for Jessup. Or maybe he'll just shoot me." "That's possible," Hayes admitted. "But you're alive now, and people in Silver Creek might not be if this continues. I'm asking you to take the risk." Silas looked at Mara. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What do you think?" he asked her. "I think it's your decision, but I also think that sometimes making amends means doing hard things." "I could die." "You could, but you'd die trying to help people instead of hurt them. That would be different from how you've lived most of your life." Hayes was watching the exchange with interest. "You two have an interesting relationship." "She keeps me honest," Silas said. "When do you want to leave?" "You'll do it?" "I'll try. Can't promise anything except that I'll talk to him." Hayes's face showed relief. "That's all I'm asking. We can leave this afternoon if you're willing. 3 days there, however long it takes to talk. 3 days back." Silas looked around the store. The shelves he'd organized, the inventory he'd learned, the routine he'd built. Leaving felt wrong, like abandoning something fragile before it had time to take root. "Go," Mara said, reading his hesitation. "The store will be here when you get back. And if you can help those people, if you can stop someone from becoming what you were, that's worth the trip." "You sure?" "I'm sure. Besides, you're not as good at organizing thread as you think. I'll have to fix half your work anyway." It was a joke, barely, but it helped. Silas nodded to Hayes. "Give me an hour to get ready." Hayes agreed to meet him at the edge of town. Silas went back to his room and packed light, a change of clothes, his revolver that he hadn't worn in weeks, some dried food. The gun felt heavy on his hip again, alien after so much time without it. When he came back downstairs, Mara was waiting outside with a canvas bag. "Food for the trip," she said, handing it to him. "And this." She gave him a small leather journal and a pencil. "What's this for?" "Writing down what you learn, what works, what doesn't. You're going to try to talk someone out of being what you were. That's new territory. Might help to document it." "I'm not much for writing." "Then draw pictures. I don't care. Just pay attention to what happens and record it somehow. Experience only teaches if you remember the lessons." Silas tucked the journal into his bag. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You might come back with nothing but new scars." "Still, thank you." Mara stepped closer and did something unexpected. She hugged him. Brief, almost businesslike, but real. "Be careful, and come back." "I will." He met Hayes at the edge of town. The man had 2 horses ready, both sturdy-looking animals built for distance rather than speed. "You ride much?" Hayes asked as Silas mounted. "Enough." They headed south, leaving Red Hollow behind. Silas turned in his saddle once to look back. The town looked peaceful in the late morning light. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved about their business. Normal life, the kind he'd spent years disrupting. The ride to Silver Creek took 3 full days, just as Hayes had promised. They traveled through scrubland and canyon country, camping rough at night, talking little. Hayes wasn't much for conversation, which Silas appreciated. The silence gave him time to think about what he was going to say to Jessup. How did you convince someone to stop being what you'd been? What words would have reached old Silas back when he was deep in the life, convinced his way was the only way? He couldn't think of any. It had taken Rowan Vane's devastating speed and calm wisdom to break through. Silas had neither of those things to offer. On the 3rd evening, they crested a rise, and Hayes pointed to a valley below. "Silver Creek," he said. The town looked similar to Red Hollow, small, frontier, dusty. Maybe 200 people if you counted everyone within riding distance. A main street with the usual businesses, a church that probably only filled on Sundays. The kind of place that could be peaceful or could be held depending on who was in charge. "Where's Jessup usually found?" Silas asked. "Saloon. He runs it. Or rather, he owns the man who runs it. Spends most evenings there, holding court." "What's he like?" "Big. Mean. Quick with his fists and quicker with his temper. Sound familiar?" It did, painfully so. They rode into town as the sun was setting. People noticed them immediately. Strangers always drew attention in small towns. But the attention here felt different from Red Hollow. More nervous. Eyes that didn't just watch but calculated escape routes. This was a town living under someone's boot. Hayes led them to a boarding house run by an older woman named Mrs. Fletcher. She recognized Hayes and welcomed him, then eyed Silas with the wariness of someone who'd learned to be careful around dangerous men. "This is Silas Crow," Hayes told her. "He's here to help." "Help how?" "By talking to Jessup." Mrs. Fletcher's expression suggested she thought that was a terrible idea. "Jessup doesn't talk. He orders, and people who don't listen end up hurt." "I know the type," Silas said quietly. "I was the type." That earned him a sharp look. "Was. I'm trying to be different now." She showed them to a room, small, clean, 2 narrow beds and a wash basin. After she left, Hayes sat on one of the beds and looked at Silas seriously. "You should know something before tomorrow. Jessup's killed men, 3 that I know of, all in what he called fair fights, but one was a shopkeeper who'd never held a gun before, and another was a drunk who could barely stand. Fair is relative with Jessup. So he's worse than I was. In some ways. In other ways, you're probably the same man at different points on the same road." That was uncomfortable to hear, but probably accurate. "What's your plan?" Hayes asked. "Talk to him in the saloon, in front of witnesses. Make it public so he can't just shoot me and claim I started something." That's assuming he cares about witnesses. It's assuming he cares about his reputation. Men like us, like I was, we live on reputation. That's both the strength and the weakness. Hayes nodded slowly. "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon. Let word spread that I'm here and why. Let him hear my name and my story. Give him time to think about it. Or time to prepare an ambush. That too." They ate dinner and chance at Mrs. Fletcher's table. Simple food, beef and potatoes, but well prepared. Other boarders joined them, a traveling merchant, a prospector, a young couple who looked like newlyweds heading west for cheap land. Normal people living normal lives, or trying to. After dinner, Silas walked through Silver Creek. The town was settling into evening. Lights appeared in windows. The saloon was doing steady business. Silas walked past it without going in, but through the window he caught a glimpse of a big man holding court at a center table, surrounded by rough-looking associates. Jessup. Had to be. He was laughing about something, loud and performative. His crew laughed with him. The other patrons in the saloon kept their distance, their body language all wrong for a relaxed evening out. They looked like prisoners who'd been allowed brief recreation time. Silas kept walking. At the edge of town, he found a spot to sit and pulled out the journal Mara had given him. In the failing light, he wrote his first entry. Day 1 in Silver Creek. Met Jessup from a distance. He's me 3 months ago. Same arrogance, same need to dominate every space. Tomorrow I try to show him what I learned. Might work, probably won't. But Mara was right. Trying to help is different from trying to hurt. That has to count for something. He closed the journal and watched the stars come out. Somewhere out there, Rowan Vane was probably sitting under these same stars, moving from town to town, carrying his skills and his quiet wisdom. Silas wondered if the man ever thought about Red Hollow, about the confrontation that had changed everything. Probably not. Men like Rowan moved forward. They didn't dwell. Silas should learn to do the same. He walked back to the boarding house and tried to sleep. It came in fits and starts, broken by dreams of confrontations that ended badly. When morning finally arrived, he woke feeling only partially rested but clear-headed about what needed to happen. Hayes was already up, standing by the window. Word spread, he said without turning around. Everyone knows you're here, knows why you came. How's Jessup taking it? Hard to say. He hasn't made any public statements, but 3 of his men have been walking around town since dawn, asking questions about you, trying to figure out if you're a threat. What are people telling them? The truth. That you are what Jessup is, that someone took you down a notch and it changed you, that you're here to talk, not fight. Silas dressed and strapped on his gun. Not because he wanted to use it, but because showing up unarmed would look like weakness rather than peace. They ate breakfast in tense silence. The other boarders avoided looking at Silas directly, though he could feel their sideways glances. Word had definitely spread. Around 2 in the afternoon, Silas walked to the saloon. Hayes stayed at the boarding house. This was something Silas needed to do alone. The saloon was surprisingly full for a weekday afternoon. Apparently everyone wanted to see what would happen. Silas pushed through the doors and the conversation died immediately. Jessup sat at his usual table, surrounded by his men. He was indeed big, bigger than Silas, which didn't happen often. Probably 6'4", heavily muscled, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts after a building collapse. Scars on scars on scars. His hands rested on the table, and they looked like they could crush stone. You must be Crow, Jessup said. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. The contrast with his appearance was unsettling. I am. I heard you wanted to talk to me. I do. Why? Silas moved closer, keeping his hands visible, non-threatening. Because I used to be you. And I learned some things I thought might be worth sharing. Jessup leaned back in his chair. You used to be me? That's bold. You know anything about me? I know you run Silver Creek through fear. I know you collect money from people who can't afford it. I know you hurt anyone who resists. I know because that's exactly what I did in Red Hollow. Did? Past tense? A man rode into my town and showed me I was living a lie, that the power I thought I had was hollow, that real strength looks different from what I was doing. Jessup's expression didn't change. And now you're what? Reformed? Reborn? Suddenly a good man? I'm trying to be better, that's all. Why? The question caught Silas off guard. Why what? Why bother? You had power. You had control. Someone took it from you, and instead of fighting to get it back, you just gave up, became soft. Why would anyone do that? Because it wasn't real power. It was just fear, and fear only works until someone isn't afraid. Everyone's afraid of something. Maybe. But building your whole life on making people afraid, that's a prison. For them and for you. Jessup studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was one of the coldest expressions Silas had ever seen. You came all this way to lecture me? To tell me I should give up everything I've built? I came to tell you that what you've built won't last. Someone faster or meaner or smarter will come along eventually. And when they do, everything you think you have will disappear like smoke. That sounds like a threat. It's not. It's just reality. I learned it the hard way. I'm trying to save you from learning it the same way. One of Jessup's men, a thin, weasel-faced man with a badly trimmed beard, laughed harshly. You hear this? He's trying to save you, boss. How charitable. The others laughed too, on cue. Jessup silenced them with a look. Let's say I believe you, Jessup said. Let's say this gunslinger humiliated you, and it made you see the light. What exactly am I supposed to do? Give up my business? Start working for someone else? Apologize to everyone I've ever hurt? You could start by stopping. Stop hurting people. Stop taking what isn't yours. Stop building a reputation on fear. And then what? What do I do for money? How do I live? Honest work. The words hung in the air. Jessup stared at Silas, then started laughing. It built slowly, starting as a chuckle and growing into genuine amusement. His men joined in nervously. Honest work, Jessup repeated when he could speak again. This man rides 3 days to tell me to get honest work. Like it's that simple. Like Silver Creek has jobs just waiting for reform bullies. It's not simple, Silas admitted. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's better than what I was. Better for who? You. The people you used to control? Because from where I sit, you just look weak. You look like a man who got broken and convinced himself he chose to be broken. The words stung because there was truth in them. Silas had been broken. Rowan had shattered the illusion Silas lived in. The question was whether what came after was growth or just different failure. Maybe I am weak, Silas said. Maybe choosing not to hurt people makes me weak, but I can sleep at night now, can you? Like a baby. Then you're lying to yourself more than I ever did. Jessup's smile vanished. He stood up slowly, and suddenly the saloon felt very small. His men stood with him, hands drifting toward their weapons. I've been patient with you, Jessup said, his soft voice taking on an edge. I've listened to your sermon. Now it's time for you to leave. Get out of Silver Creek. Don't come back. Not until I've said what I came to say. You've said it. I'm not interested. Then let me tell you what's going to happen if you don't change. One day, someone like Rowan Vane will ride through Silver Creek. Someone who's actually as good as you pretend to be, and they'll take about 5 seconds to show you what you really are. It'll happen in front of everyone, and when it does, all this— Silas gestured around the saloon, at Jessup's crew, at the Empire of Fear. All this will collapse, and you'll be left with nothing except the memory of all the people you hurt for no reason except your own ego. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone in the saloon was watching, waiting to see how Jessup would respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. Get out, now, while I still feel merciful. Silas held his ground for another moment, meeting Jessup's eyes. He saw no recognition there, no moment of understanding, just anger and wounded pride. He'd failed. The trip had been for nothing. I'm sorry, Silas said. Sorry for you and for everyone here who has to live under your boot. When it all falls apart, and it will, I hope you remember that someone tried to warn you. He turned and walked out of the saloon. Behind him, he heard Jessup say something that made his men laugh, mocking laughter, the kind meant to diminish and dismiss. Outside, the afternoon sun was brutal. Silas stood on the boardwalk, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders. He'd thought he could make a difference, thought his story might reach someone else living the same lie. He'd been wrong. Haze appeared from wherever he'd been watching. That went about as well as expected. He didn't listen. No, men like Jessup don't listen until they have no choice. Same as you didn't. So what was the point? Why did I come here? Because you tried. That matters to the people of Silver Creek, even if it doesn't matter to Jessup. They saw someone stand up to him, even just with words. They saw that he's not invincible. A lot of good that does them. More than you think. Seeds get planted. Sometimes they take time to grow. They walked back to the boarding house to collect their things. Silas was ready to leave immediately, to put Silver Creek behind him. But as they were loading their horses, a woman approached, young, maybe 25, with tired eyes and work-worn hands. Mr. Crow? She said quietly. Yes? I wanted to thank you for trying. I didn't accomplish anything. You showed us it's possible to stand up to someone like Jessup without violence. That's more than anyone else has done." She glanced around nervously, making sure no one was watching. "My husband, Jessup's men beat him last month for being late with a payment. He's still recovering. Every day I watch him struggle to work, to provide, and I hate Jessup for what he did. But I also hate what it's done to my husband. He's afraid now, jumps at shadows. That's not who he was." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just know that what you did today, coming here, speaking truth to Jessup even when he wouldn't listen, that gave me hope. Gave us hope. Maybe things don't change today, but maybe they change tomorrow or next week. But they won't change at all if nobody ever tries." She left before Silas could respond. He watched her disappear into the general store, then mounted his horse. The ride back to Red Hollow was quiet. Silas spent most of it thinking about the woman's words, about Jessup's refusal to listen, about the whole strange trip. He pulled out Mara's journal and wrote during rest stops. Failed to reach Jessup. He's too deep in the lie, same as I was. But met someone who said what I did mattered anyway. Don't know if I believe that. Don't know what success looks like when you're trying to change hearts instead of break bones. Everything is harder than it used to be. But maybe harder is better. They reached Red Hollow on the 6th day. The town looked unchanged, same buildings, same streets, same rhythm of life. But when Silas rode in, something felt different. People didn't look away as quickly. A few actually nodded to him in greeting. Mrs. Patterson, whose son Silas had once hurt, gave him a small wave from her porch. Small things, barely noticeable, but different. Mara was in her store when Silas walked in. She looked up from her ledger and smiled. "You're back, and alive. That's good." "Barely. The trip didn't go how I hoped. Tell me." He did, leaving nothing out. The confrontation with Jessup, the mockery, the failure to reach him. The woman who'd thanked him anyway. When he finished, Mara was quiet for a moment. "You expected to save him," she finally said. "I guess I did. That was never going to happen. People don't change because someone tells them to. They change when they're ready, or when circumstances force them. You did what you could. That's enough." "It doesn't feel like enough." "It never does. But you planted a seed. Maybe it grows. Maybe it doesn't. That's not up to you." Silas sat down heavily in the chair behind the counter. His body ached from days of riding. His mind ached from the weight of failure. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to be this person who tries to help instead of hurt. It's exhausting, and the results are unclear, and I never know if I'm doing it right." "Welcome to being human," Mara said. "The rest of us have been confused for years." Despite everything, Silas smiled. "Thanks." "For what?" "For keeping me honest. For giving me a place to try." "You're welcome. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we've got 3 deliveries coming in, and they're all your problem." The deliveries came early, before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. Silas was already at the store, having discovered that starting work before dawn meant fewer people watching him, fewer opportunities for awkward encounters. The solitude helped him think, helped him process everything that had happened in Silver Creek. The first wagon belonged to a supplier from Tucson, dry goods mostly. The driver was a heavy-set man named Carson, who'd been making this route for years. He recognized Silas immediately. "Heard you're working for Mara now," Carson said, eyeing him carefully as they unloaded crates. "That's right. Heard some other things, too. About what happened with that gunslinger." Silas kept working, stacking crates on the loading dock. "People talk." "They do. And what they're saying is that you changed, that the terror of Red Hollow decided to become something else." Carson paused, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning. "My question is whether it's real or just another angle, another way to control people." The question was fair. Silas set down the crate he was holding and faced Carson directly. "I don't know how to prove it's real except to keep doing it, keep showing up, keep working, keep trying not to be what I was. If that's not enough, then it's not enough. But it's all I've got." Carson studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair answer. Better than I expected, honestly." He climbed back onto his wagon. "Tell Mara the next shipment's in 2 weeks. And Crow? Good luck. Changing who you are is harder than most people know." The second delivery was fabric from a mill in Phoenix. The third was hardware. Nails, hammers, saw blades, all the tools people needed to build and repair their lives. By the time everything was unloaded and organized, the sun was fully up and Mara had arrived. "You started without me," she said. "Couldn't sleep." Still thinking about Silver Creek? Among other things. She came over to where he was sorting through a box of hardware, checking the inventory list. "You want to talk about it?" "Not particularly, but I probably should." They worked while they talked, hands busy even as words tried to make sense of confusion. "I keep thinking about Jessup," Silas said, "about how he wouldn't listen, how nothing I said made any difference." "That bothers you?" "Of course it bothers me. I went there thinking I could help, thinking my experience meant something. Instead, I just got mocked and sent away." "And the woman who thanked you? The one who said you gave her hope?" "She was being kind." "No," Mara said firmly. "She was being honest. There's a difference." She set down the bolt of fabric she'd been examining. "You went to Silver Creek expecting to save Jessup. That was never going to work. But you did show the people living under his control that he's not untouchable, that someone could stand up to him without violence." "Seeds, Silas. You planted seeds. Seeds take time to grow. Meanwhile, people are getting hurt." "Yes, and that's terrible. But you can't save everyone, and trying to will destroy you." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You spent years being the source of pain in Red Hollow. Now you want to fix everyone else's pain immediately. That's not how this works. Change is slow. Forgiveness is slower. And redemption, if that's even what this is, redemption takes a lifetime." Her words settled over him like dust. Uncomfortable but true. The store opened and the day began its usual rhythm. Customers came and went. Some still treated Silas with suspicion, others with curiosity, a few with something approaching acceptance. He was learning to read the difference, learning which conversations to pursue and which to let pass. Around noon, Old Man Garrett came in looking agitated. "There's news from Silver Creek," he said without preamble. Silas's stomach dropped. "What kind of news?" "Ryder came through this morning, said there was a shooting there 3 days ago. Jessup killed a man named Hayes. Something about Hayes organizing resistance against him." The world tilted. Robert Hayes. The man who'd brought Silas to Silver Creek, who'd believed talking could make a difference. Who'd shown courage Silas was still trying to learn. Dead. "How did it happen?" Silas asked, his voice hollow. "Jessup called him out in the street, claimed Hayes was spreading lies about him, poisoning the town against him. Hayes tried to talk his way out of it. Jessup shot him anyway." Mara had gone very still. "Where's Jessup now?" "Still in Silver Creek, according to the writer, acting like nothing happened, calling it self-defense." Old Man Garrett left to spread the news further. Silas stood in the middle of the store, fists clenched so tight his bandaged hands ached. "This is my fault," he said quietly. "No, it's not. I went there. I stirred things up. Hayes stood up to Jessup because of what I said. And now he's dead." "Hayes stood up to Jessup because Hayes was brave," Mara said firmly. "He was organizing resistance before you arrived. Your visit didn't create his courage. It just gave him hope that change was possible. Hope that got him killed. Hope that might still change Silver Creek. You don't know what happens next." But Silas barely heard her. He was already moving, taking off his work apron, heading for the door. "Where are you going?" Mara called after him. "To finish what I started." "Silas, wait!" But he was already gone, out the door and heading for the livery stable. His mind was clear for the first time since returning from Silver Creek. He'd tried talking. He'd tried being peaceful. And Hayes had died for it. Some men only understood one language. He was saddling his horse when Mara caught up with him. "You're going to do something stupid," she said. "Probably. You're going to ride to Silver Creek and confront Jessup. You're going to challenge him the way Rowan challenged you." "Yes." "And you think that's going to end differently than it did for you?" "I don't care how it ends. Hayes died because I wasn't brave enough to back up my words with action. I'm not making that mistake again." Mara grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. Jessup has killed 3 men in gunfights. You've killed no one. He's faster than you, meaner than you, and more willing to cheat. If you ride to Silver Creek, you will die. And your death won't change anything except make me have to find a new clerk. I can't just do nothing. I'm not saying do nothing. I'm saying don't do this. Don't throw away everything you've built here because guilt is eating you alive. What would you have me do? Hayes died because of me. Hayes died because Jessup is a murderer. That's on Jessup, not you. Her grip on his arm tightened. You want to honor Hayes? Build something here that lasts. Show Red Hollow that change is real and permanent. That's worth more than dying in a street in Silver Creek. Silas wanted to argue, wanted to explain the fire burning in his chest that demanded action, demanded blood for blood. But looking at Mara's face, he saw something that made him pause. She was afraid. Not of him, but for him. I can't just let this go, he said. But the conviction was already weakening. You're not letting it go. You're choosing to live with it, to carry it, to let it motivate you to be better rather than letting it drag you back into being what you were. He stood there, one hand on his saddle, the other clenched in a fist. Every instinct screamed at him to ride south, to face Jessup, to end this with violence the way everything in his old life had ended. But that was old Silas talking, the man who solved every problem with his fists or his gun, the man who'd hurt so many people and called it strength. He removed his hand from the saddle. You're right, he said quietly, but I hate that you're right. I know. Come back to the store. Let's figure out what we can actually do to help Silver Creek. They walked back together, Silas feeling the weight of inaction almost as heavily as he'd felt the weight of guilt. But Mara was right. Riding to his death wouldn't help anyone. Back at the store, they sat in the back room and talked it through. What could be done? What should be done? Silver Creek needs a marshal, Mara said. Real law, not Jessup's version of it. If we could get word to the territorial authorities, that takes time. Weeks, maybe months. More people could die. Yes, but it's the right way. The legal way. Silas thought about Hayes, about his courage, about his belief that change was possible through persistence rather than violence. The man had died for that belief. The least Silas could do was honor it. All right, he said, we contact the territorial marshal, document everything we know about Jessup, build a case. It's not as satisfying as revenge. No, but it's better. Over the next 2 weeks, they did exactly that. Mara wrote letters to the territorial authorities, laying out everything she'd learned about Silver Creek. Silas wrote his own statement, describing what he'd seen, what Jessup had admitted to, the atmosphere of fear in the town. They sent the letters by express rider, paying extra for speed and reliability. Then they waited. Life in Red Hollow continued. Silas worked at the store, learning more each day about commerce and fairness, and treating people with dignity. The town's perception of him kept shifting, slowly but noticeably. Fear gave way to wariness to cautious acceptance. Mrs. Chen came back to the store, though she still flinched when Silas moved too quickly. But she came back. That meant something. Tommy Chen came too, his jaw healed but still slightly crooked from where Silas had broken it. He didn't speak to Silas directly, but he didn't leave either. Small steps. One evening, about 3 weeks after the news of Hayes' death, Pete from the saloon stopped by the store just as Mara was closing. Got something for you, he said to Silas, holding out a letter. What is it? Came by stage today. Addressed to you, care of Mara's store. Silas took the letter carefully. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the paper cheap. He opened it and read. It was from the woman who'd thanked him in Silver Creek. Her name was Elizabeth Hayes, Robert's wife. Mr. Crow, the letter read, I wanted you to know that my husband's death was not your fault. Robert believed in peaceful change, but he also knew the risks. He chose to stand up to Jessup knowing it might cost him everything. That was his choice, his courage, not your burden to carry. But I also wanted you to know that your visit mattered. After you left, Robert and others began organizing. Quietly at first, then more openly. They documented Jessup's crimes. They supported each other. They stopped being silent victims and became active resistance. Robert's death was not in vain. The territorial marshal arrived in Silver Creek yesterday. He arrested Jessup and his men for multiple murders and extortion. They'll stand trial in Tucson next month. Silver Creek is free. My husband helped free it. You helped start the process. Thank you for that. And thank you for showing us that even men who seem irredeemable can change. That gave us hope when hope was scarce. With gratitude, Elizabeth Hayes. Silas read the letter 3 times, then handed it to Mara without speaking. She read it silently, her expression shifting from curiosity to understanding to something that might have been pride. "Seeds," she said quietly, handing back the letter. "They grew." Silas folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. The guilt didn't disappear, guilt that deep never truly vanished, but it transformed into something more manageable. Hayes had made his own choices, had died for them. But his death had meant something, had changed something. That night, Silas pulled out the journal Mara had given him and wrote the longest entry yet. Learned today that Jessup was arrested, that Hayes's death led to Silver Creek's freedom. Don't know how I feel about that. Glad they're free. Angry it cost Hayes his life. Guilty I wasn't braver when I had the chance. But also understanding that sometimes change requires sacrifice, and the sacrifice isn't always ours to make. Mara keeps talking about seeds, about planting them and trusting they'll grow. I'm starting to understand what she means. Every small choice to be better, to help instead of hurt, to build instead of destroy, those are seeds. Some grow immediately, some take years, some never grow at all. But you plant them anyway because that's what decent people do. I'm not decent yet. Maybe I never will be. But I'm trying. That has to count for something. The weeks turned into months. Spring gave way to summer. Red Hollow sweltered under relentless heat, and Silas sweated through his work at the store, learning patience and commerce and the slow art of earning trust. The town changed around him, or maybe he just started noticing things he'd been too self-absorbed to see before. Families grew. Businesses expanded. The Henderson kids got taller and kept stealing penny candy, but Mrs. Henderson started paying extra to cover it, a quiet dignity in how she handled her children's small crimes. The church held a social one Saturday evening. Mara volunteered to provide refreshments and drafted Silas to help. He'd never been to a church social, had never been welcome at one, but now he stood in the yard helping set up tables while children played and adults talked and everything felt almost normal. "You look uncomfortable, Mara observed, bringing another tray of biscuits. "I am uncomfortable. All these people are just people, living their lives, not thinking about you nearly as much as you think they're thinking about you." She was probably right. Silas forced himself to relax, to focus on the work rather than the watching eyes. Tommy Chen approached him as the sun was setting, the boy's crooked jaw catching the orange light. "Mr. Crow?" he said hesitantly. Silas set down the bench he was moving. "Tommy, I just wanted to say—" The boy paused, gathering courage. "My ma says I should forgive you for what you did to me. Says holding on to anger only hurts me, not you. Your ma is a wise woman. I'm not sure I can forgive you yet. It still hurts sometimes, my jaw. I don't expect forgiveness. What I did to you was wrong, criminal, really. You were a kid doing a job and I hurt you because I could, because hurting people made me feel powerful. Why'd you stop? Someone showed me I wasn't as powerful as I thought. And then I had to figure out who I was without the power. Turns out I'm just a man trying to do better." Tommy nodded slowly, processing this. "Ma says you're doing good work at Miss Quinn's store, that you're fair with customers, that you even helped the Patterson family when they couldn't afford their full order." Silas remembered that. The Pattersons had come in short on cash and he'd quietly marked down several items to make their money stretch. Small thing, barely worth mentioning, but apparently people had noticed. "It was nothing," Silas said. "It was something to them." Tommy extended his hand. "I'm not ready to forgive you, but I'm willing to see who you become. That's the best I can offer." Silas shook his hand carefully, aware of the damage he'd done to it years before. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." Tommy walked away, back to his friends, and Silas stood in the cooling evening feeling something he couldn't quite name. Not redemption. That felt too grand. But maybe acceptance of a long road ahead, with no guarantee of arrival but worth walking anyway. The social continued into the night. Music played. Someone had a fiddle, someone else a guitar. People danced and laughed and lived. Silas watched from the edges, still not quite part of it, but no longer completely outside it either. Mara found him near midnight when the crowd was thinning. "You did good tonight," she said. "I moved some tables. You were here. You participated. You let people see you as something other than a threat. That matters more than you know." How do you know so much about this? About change and redemption and all of it? She was quiet for a moment. Because I had to learn it too. Different circumstances, different mistakes. But the learning, that's universal. We're all just stumbling forward, trying to be better than we were yesterday. What mistakes did you make? That's a story for another time. Maybe when you've been working for me for a year without breaking anything expensive. She smiled when she said it, and Silas found himself smiling back. Real smiles, not the aggressive baring of teeth he'd used for intimidation. It felt strange on his face. Strange, but good. Summer deepened. News came from Tucson that Jessup and his men had been tried and convicted. Jessup got 20 years in the territorial prison. His lieutenants got various lesser sentences. Silver Creek was rebuilding, finding its footing as a town no longer ruled by fear. Elizabeth Hayes sent another letter, thanking Silas again and inviting him to visit Silver Creek sometime. He wrote back saying maybe someday, when enough time had passed, when he'd proven to himself that his change was permanent. Red Hollow continued its slow transformation. With Silas no longer terrorizing everyone, other people started stepping into leadership roles. The town council actually met regularly for the first time in years. They discussed things like water rights and road maintenance and whether they could afford a real schoolhouse. Normal problems for normal people. Silas attended one meeting, curious about how things worked when violence wasn't the deciding factor. He sat in the back and listened to people debate and compromise and occasionally argue, but never threaten. It was tedious and slow and completely fascinating. After the meeting, old man Garrett approached him. "You've been working at Mara's for 6 months now," he said. "About that. I've been watching you. We all have, really. And I wanted to say—" He paused, as if the words were difficult. "I wanted to say that I believe you've changed. That whatever happened with that gunslinger, it was real. You're not the man you were. Thank you. That means a lot. Don't thank me yet. I'm also going to say that you've got a long way to go before people truly trust you, before we forget the fear. But you're on the path. That's something." It was honest. More honest than false praise would have been. Silas appreciated that. One evening in late August, as the heat finally started breaking, Silas sat on the back step of Mara's store watching the sunset. She came out and sat beside him, 2 glasses of lemonade in her hands. She gave him one. "You've gotten quieter," she observed. "Just thinking." About? About how much has changed, about Hayes and Jessup and Rowan and everything that's happened since that afternoon. Any conclusions? Just that nothing's simple. I thought getting beaten in a gunfight would be the hard part. Turns out that was the easy part. Everything after, learning to be different, earning trust, living with guilt, accepting that some things can't be fixed, that's the hard part. Welcome to being human. You said that before. It's still true. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking lemonade, watching the sky turn colors. "I'm proud of you," Mara said eventually. Silas looked at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because 6 months ago, you were the worst person in Red Hollow. Now you're just a person. That's real progress. Just a person. That's a low bar. It's the only bar that matters. Everything else, hero, villain, saint, sinner, those are costumes. Underneath, we're all just people trying to figure out how to live with ourselves and each other. And you think I'm figuring it out? I think you're trying. That's all anyone can do." The sky darkened fully. Stars appeared, bright and constant. Silas thought about Rowan Vane, wherever he was now. The man had changed Silas's life with 5 seconds of gun work and a few words of hard truth. Had he done the same for others in other towns? Was he even aware of the ripples he created? Probably not. Men like Rowan moved through the world making impacts they never saw the results of. Maybe that was okay. Maybe the impact mattered more than the acknowledgement. "What would you have done?" Silas asked. "If Rowan hadn't come to town? If things had just continued the way they were?" Mara considered that. "Eventually I would have left, moved somewhere else, started over. I couldn't live indefinitely in a town ruled by fear. And everyone else? Would have suffered until someone like Rowan showed up, or until you pushed too far and sparked a rebellion. Change was coming either way. Rowan just made it happen faster and with less bloodshed. Do you think I would have listened if you'd been the one to confront me instead of him? No, you needed to be humiliated to crack your shell. I could have talked until I was blue, and you would have dismissed it. Sometimes the lesson has to hurt before it takes root. That was probably true. Silas had spent years ignoring signs that his path was wrong. Only the devastating public exposure of his inadequacy had been enough to break through. "You're too honest sometimes," he said. "Someone has to be." She stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. "Come on, let's close up properly. Tomorrow's going to be busy." They worked together in the quiet store, banking the fire in the small stove, checking that everything was locked and secure. It had become a comfortable routine, this end-of-day ritual, proof that change could become normal if you stuck with it long enough. As they stepped outside and Mara locked the door, she turned to Silas one more time. "I meant what I said earlier. I'm proud of you. And I think—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "I think Robert Hayes would be proud too, and even Rowan Vane if he knew. You took the lesson he taught you and you're actually living it. A lot of men would have just nursed their wounded pride and plotted revenge. You chose different." "I chose survival. Everything else just followed." "That's how all good choices start, with simple survival. Then we build from there." She walked away toward her own rooms above the store. Silas stood in the street, looking at Red Hollow settling into night. A town healing slowly from years of his violence. A town learning to trust again. A town where children could grow up without fear, where people could make honest livings, where mistakes were survivable rather than fatal. He'd helped create the fear. Now he was part of creating something better. It wasn't redemption. He'd done too much for simple redemption. But it was progress. It was meaning. It was a life worth living instead of a reputation worth fleeing. Somewhere far away, Rowan Vane was probably sitting under these same stars. And somewhere else, Elizabeth Hayes was rebuilding her life in a Silver Creek freed from tyranny. And somewhere closer, Tommy Chen was learning to forgive, and Mrs. Patterson was raising her children in peace, and Mara Quinn was building a business on fairness instead of fear. All of it connected. All of it rippling outward from one afternoon, one confrontation, one man finally seeing the truth about himself. Silas Crow, former terror of Red Hollow, failed gunslinger, humble store clerk, and work in progress, walked back to his room at the boarding house. He pulled out the journal Mara had given him and wrote his final entry. 6 months since Rowan Vane changed my life. 6 months of learning that being good is harder than being bad. That earning trust takes longer than destroying it, that the man I was and the man I'm becoming are connected by a road I'll walk the rest of my life. I don't know if this counts as redemption. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. What I know is that I'm trying, every day, trying to be better than yesterday, to help instead of hurt, to build instead of destroy. It's not much, but it's honest. And maybe that's enough. He closed the journal and set it on the small table by his bed. Outside, Red Hollow slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring more work, more small choices, more opportunities to be either the man he was or the man he was becoming. Silas lay down and, for the first time in as long as he could remember, slept without nightmares, without guilt crushing him awake, without fear of who he was or what he'd done. He slept like a man who'd finally learned that strength wasn't about dominating others. It was about controlling yourself. About choosing right even when wrong was easier. About planting seeds and trusting they would grow, even if you never saw the harvest. And in the morning, when the sun rose over Red Hollow, Silas Crow would wake up and keep trying. Because that's what people did. They tried. They failed. They learned. They tried again. It wasn't a perfect ending, but perfect endings were for fairy tales. This was real life with all its complications and compromises and second chances. And sometimes in real life, that was more than enough.